Royal Guard searches Camilla's wardrobe, unearths the late Queen's iconic coronation gown. The morning of October 15th started like any other day at Buckingham Palace. The grand halls echoed with the familiar sounds of servants preparing for their daily duties. Inside the Queen's quarters, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Security officers made their routine inspections, checking rooms and corridors as they had done countless times before. Nobody expected that this particular morning would uncover a discovery that would shake the very foundations of the royal household. Officer James Mitchell had served in the Royal Guard for 12 years. He knew every corner of the palace, every painting on the walls, and every protocol that governed life within these historic walls. On this morning, he received an unusual assignment. The head of security approached him with a special task. There had been reports of missing items from the royal collection. Small things at first, a brooch here, a decorative piece there. Nothing too alarming, but enough to warrant a thorough investigation. James was given the responsibility to conduct a discreet search of various quarters, including those belonging to Queen Camilla. Queen Camilla had been away from the palace that morning. She attended a charity event in the countryside, an engagement that had been scheduled weeks in advance. The timing seemed perfect for the security team to conduct their investigation without causing any disruption or embarrassment. James understood the delicate nature of his assignment. He needed to be thorough but respectful, professional but discreet. The royal family's privacy was paramount, even during an investigation. As James entered the Queen's dressing room, he was immediately struck by its elegance. The space was vast, with wardrobes lining 3 walls from floor to ceiling. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow across the room. Everything was meticulously organized, a testament to the palace staff's dedication. Designer gowns hung in neat rows, shoes were arranged by color and style, and accessories were displayed with museum-like precision. James began his search methodically, starting from the left side of the room and working his way across. Hours passed as he carefully examined each section. He documented his findings, noting the contents of drawers and shelves. Everything seemed in order. The missing items he was searching for were nowhere to be found in the obvious places. As he reached the far corner of the room, he noticed something unusual. Behind a row of evening gowns, there was a section of the wardrobe that appeared different from the rest. The wood paneling had a slight discoloration, as if it had been touched more frequently than other areas. James moved the gowns aside and examined the panel more closely. His trained eye detected a small indentation in the wood grain. Pressing gently, he heard a soft click. The panel swung open, revealing a hidden compartment. His heart began to race. In all his years of service, he had never encountered a secret space like this within the royal quarters. The compartment was deep, extending far back into the wall. It was dark inside, and he reached for his flashlight to illuminate the space. What he saw next made him freeze in place. Hanging inside the hidden compartment was a garment bag, larger than any he had seen before. The bag itself was made of fine silk aged to a soft ivory color. Embroidered on the front were initials that made James's hands tremble. The letters ER were stitched in gold thread, elegant and unmistakable. Elizabeth Regina, the late Queen's personal monogram. With extraordinary care, James reached into the compartment and slowly pulled the garment bag forward. It was heavier than he expected, and he could feel the weight of history in his hands. He laid it carefully on a nearby velvet chaise lounge. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for the zipper. He knew he was about to unveil something significant, though he had no idea just how monumental this discovery would prove to be. As the zipper slowly descended, glimpses of fabric began to appear. First he saw white silk, then intricate embroidery and gold thread. His breath caught in his throat as more of the garment was revealed. The craftsmanship was beyond anything he had ever witnessed. Every stitch was perfect, every detail was exquisite. When the bag was fully opened, James found himself staring at what could only be described as a masterpiece of royal fashion. Before him lay the coronation gown of Queen Elizabeth II. The very dress she had worn on June 2nd, 1953, when she was crowned in Westminster Abbey. The gown was magnificent, even after all these years. Made of white satin, it featured the emblems of the United Kingdom and Commonwealth countries embroidered in colored silks and gold thread. The intricate needlework depicted roses, thistles, shamrocks, and leeks. representing England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. There were also maple leaves for Canada, wattle for Australia, and ferns for New Zealand. James stood motionless, processing what he had found. This gown was supposed to be in the royal collection, carefully preserved and protected. It was a priceless piece of British history, a symbol of the monarchy's continuity and tradition. Yet here it was, hidden away in a secret compartment in Queen Camilla's wardrobe. Questions flooded his mind. How did it get here? Why was it concealed? Who knew about this hiding place? And most importantly, what should he do next? He carefully documented the scene with his camera, taking photographs from multiple angles. Every detail needed to be recorded. The hidden compartment, the garment bag, and the gown itself all required thorough documentation. As he worked, James couldn't help but admire the dress up close. The pearls sewn into the fabric caught the light beautifully. The train, which stretched several feet, was adorned with embroidered golden stars. This was not just a dress. It was a work of art, a piece of national heritage that belonged to all of Britain. The weight of his discovery began to settle on James's shoulders. He knew that what he had found would create waves throughout the palace and beyond. This was not just about missing items anymore. This was about the late Queen's most precious garment being hidden away, seemingly without proper authorization. He needed to report this immediately to his superiors, but he also understood that the information needed to be handled with extreme sensitivity. The implications were enormous and the potential for scandal was significant. Royal Guard searches Camilla's wardrobe. Unearths the late Queen's iconic coronation gown. James closed the garment bag with the same care he had used to open it. His hands were steadier now, though his mind raced with possibilities. He stepped out of the dressing room and immediately contacted his commanding officer, Major Thomas Blackwood. The conversation was brief but urgent. Within 15 minutes, Major Blackwood arrived at the Queen's quarters, his face grave with concern. When James showed him what he had discovered, the color drained from the Major's face. Major Blackwood had served the royal family for over 20 years. He had witnessed many unusual situations, but nothing quite like this. He examined the gown carefully, then looked at James with an expression that mixed shock and worry. They both understood the gravity of the situation. This was not something that could be handled through normal channels. The discovery needed to be reported to the highest levels of palace administration immediately. Within the hour, the Lord Chamberlain arrived at the scene. Lord Christopher Hampton was a man known for his calm demeanor and sound judgment. He had managed countless royal affairs over his tenure, but even he appeared visibly shaken when he saw the coronation gown. He stood in silence for several moments, his eyes fixed on the magnificent dress. Finally, he spoke, his voice carefully controlled but betraying his inner turmoil. Lord Hampton immediately ordered that the room be secured, and that nobody else should enter without his express permission. He needed time to think, to understand what this discovery meant and to determine the appropriate course of action. The palace archivists were summoned discreetly. They arrived carrying large leather-bound volumes containing records of the royal collection. Page after page was examined, cross-referencing inventory lists from the past decades. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. According to official records, the coronation gown should have been in the Royal Collection storage facility at Windsor Castle. The dress had been carefully preserved there since the late Queen's passing, kept under climate-controlled conditions alongside other historic royal garments. Yet here it was in a hidden compartment in Queen Camilla's personal wardrobe at Buckingham Palace. Someone had moved it, and someone had gone to great lengths to conceal it. The archivists examined the dress more closely. They noted that it appeared to be in excellent condition, suggesting it had been well cared for wherever it had been kept. There were no signs of damage or deterioration. The fabric retained its luster, and the embroidery remained vibrant. Whoever had taken possession of the gown had treated it with respect and proper preservation techniques. This observation only added to the confusion. If someone wanted to steal or damage the dress, why maintain it so carefully? Lord Hampton made a difficult decision. King Charles needed to be informed immediately. This was not the kind of situation that could wait or be resolved without the monarch's knowledge. The king was at Highgrove House, his private residence in Gloucestershire, but arrangements were made for a secure video call. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. Nobody else was present for the discussion, but those waiting outside could see through the glass door. that the king's expression changed multiple times during the conversation. Meanwhile, across the countryside, Queen Camilla concluded her charity engagement. She visited a children's hospital, spending time with young patients and their families. Photographers captured her warm smiles and genuine interactions with the children. She had no idea of the storm brewing back at the palace. Her security detail received encrypted messages on their devices, but chose not to disturb her during the public event. They would brief her privately once she was back in the car. As Camilla's motorcade began its journey back to London, her private secretary received a call. The conversation was brief, and when it ended, the secretary's face had turned pale. She leaned forward to speak with the Queen, her voice barely above a whisper. What she said made Camilla sit up straight, her public smile fading immediately. The Queen asked her driver to increase speed within safe limits. Suddenly, getting back to Buckingham Palace had become extremely urgent. Back at the palace, preparations were being made for what promised to be an extremely difficult conversation. Lord Hampton ordered refreshments to be prepared in the Queen's private sitting room. He wanted the discussion to take place in comfortable, private surroundings, rather than in some formal meeting room. The coronation gown remained in the dressing room, now under constant guard by 2 officers who had been sworn to absolute secrecy about what they were protecting. Staff members throughout the palace sensed that something unusual was happening. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly when anyone approached. Senior officials moved through the corridors with purposeful strides and worried expressions. The atmosphere had changed completely from the calm morning routine. Something significant was unfolding, and everyone could feel the tension in the air, even if they didn't know the details. James Mitchell remained near the dressing room, waiting to provide any additional information that might be needed. His mind kept returning to the moment he had opened that hidden compartment. He thought about the late Queen, who had worn that magnificent gown on the most important day of her reign. He wondered what she would think if she knew where her coronation dress had ended up. The weight of being the person who made this discovery felt heavier with each passing hour. In the royal archives, researchers were pulling every file related to the coronation gown. They examined photographs from the 1953 ceremony, studied conservation reports, and reviewed transfer documents. Every piece of paper that mentioned the dress was being scrutinized. They were building a timeline, trying to understand when the gown might have been moved and by whom. The official records showed no authorization for the dress to leave Windsor Castle. Queen Camilla's motorcade finally arrived at Buckingham Palace. The gates opened smoothly, and the vehicles proceeded up the drive. Usually, Camilla would take a moment to wave at any well-wishers gathered outside, but today she went directly inside. Her face was composed, but those who knew her well could see the concern in her eyes. She was escorted immediately to her sitting room, where Lord Hampton and several other senior officials waited. Royal Guard searches Camilla's wardrobe, unearths the late Queen's iconic coronation gown. The sitting room felt smaller than usual with so many serious faces gathered inside. Queen Camilla sat in her favorite armchair, her posture straight despite the obvious stress of the situation. Lord Hampton began explaining the morning's discovery, choosing his words carefully. He described how the routine security check had led to the finding of the hidden compartment, and then to the discovery of Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown. As he spoke, Camilla's expression remained controlled, but her fingers gripped the armrest more tightly. When Lord Hampton finished his account, silence filled the room. Everyone waited for Queen Camilla to respond. She took a deep breath and looked around at the assembled officials. Her voice when she finally spoke was steady but filled with emotion. She explained that she had no knowledge of any coronation gown being in her wardrobe. The hidden compartment itself was news to her. She had never explored that particular section of the dressing room thoroughly, trusting that the staff maintained everything properly. Camilla stood and walked to the window, looking out at the palace gardens. She recalled moving into these quarters after becoming queen consort. The rooms had been redecorated to suit her taste, but many of the original fixtures and furniture pieces remained. She had assumed everything was as it should be. The thought that something so precious and historically significant had been hidden in her personal space without her knowledge was deeply troubling. She turned back to face the officials, her concern evident. Lord Hampton suggested that they needed to investigate who might have had access to create such a hidden compartment and to place the gown there. The timeline was crucial. When had the compartment been built? When had the gown been moved from Windsor Castle? These questions needed answers. The palace employment records would need to be examined. Every person who had worked on the Queen's quarters would need to be interviewed discreetly. A senior member of the household staff was called into the meeting. Margaret Davies had worked at Buckingham Palace for 35 years. She had served Queen Elizabeth for decades and knew the palace's history better than almost anyone. When she was shown photographs of the hidden compartment, her eyes widened with recognition. She revealed something that changed everyone's understanding of the situation completely. Margaret explained that the hidden compartment was not new. It had been built in the 1960s, during Queen Elizabeth's own time in those quarters. The late Queen herself had commissioned it, though few people knew about its existence. It was designed as a secure space for her most precious personal items, things she wanted to keep close but private. Over the years, the knowledge of this secret compartment had been passed down only to the most senior and trusted members of staff. This revelation shifted the entire nature of the investigation. If Queen Elizabeth had built the compartment, then perhaps she had also placed her coronation gown there. But why would she move such an important historical artifact from its proper place in the royal collection? Why keep it hidden in her personal quarters? Margaret suggested that perhaps the late Queen had wanted to keep the dress close to her for sentimental reasons. Though this was purely speculation on her part, Lord Hampden requested access to Queen Elizabeth's private papers. Perhaps there were notes or instructions that would explain the situation. The royal archives contained boxes of personal correspondence and journals that had not yet been fully catalogued. With King Charles's permission, archivists began carefully reviewing these documents. They were looking for any mention of the coronation gown or instructions about the hidden compartment. Days passed as the investigation continued quietly. The gown remained in the dressing room, now properly documented and under careful watch. Specialists from the Royal Collection Trust were called in to examine it. They confirmed its authenticity beyond any doubt. This was indeed the original coronation gown, not a replica or copy. The dress matched every detail in historical records, from the specific placement of embroidered emblems to the unique pattern of pearls along the bodice. The preservation experts were puzzled by the gown's excellent condition. If it had been in the hidden compartment for years, someone must have been caring for it regularly. The fabric showed no signs of neglect. The embroidery remained vibrant and there was no fading or deterioration. This suggested that the gown had been checked and maintained, even in its secret location. But by whom? And under whose instructions? Meanwhile, researchers made a breakthrough in Queen Elizabeth's personal papers. They found a leather-bound journal from 2015. In it, the Queen had written several entries about her Coronation Day memories. One entry, dated on the anniversary of her coronation, mentioned the gown specifically. She wrote about wanting to see it one more time, to touch the fabric and remember that momentous day in her youth. She expressed sadness that the dress was locked away in storage, inaccessible without formal procedures. Further entries revealed more of the story. Queen Elizabeth had quietly arranged for the gown to be brought to her private quarters. She wanted it nearby where she could occasionally take it out and reminisce. The entries described how much comfort the dress brought her, especially during difficult times. She wrote about running her fingers over the embroidered flowers, each one representing a part of her realm, and feeling connected to her coronation vows and her life's purpose. The journal entries also explained why the arrangement was kept secret. Queen Elizabeth knew that official protocols required the gown to remain in the royal collection. She understood that her desire to keep it close was sentimental rather than practical. Rather than create complications by formally requesting the dress be moved, she had simply arranged for it to be placed in her secret compartment. Only a handful of her most trusted staff members knew about the arrangement. This discovery transformed the situation from a potential scandal into a poignant story of a monarch's private relationship with her past. Queen Elizabeth had not been trying to hide the gown from the world or steal from the royal collection. She had simply wanted to keep close a dress that represented the most significant day of her long reign. It was a deeply personal decision made by a woman who had spent her entire life in service to duty and protocol. King Charles was moved when he learned the full story. He remembered his mother's dedication to her role and understood why she might have wanted this connection to her coronation. He gave instructions that the gown should be handled with the utmost respect and sensitivity. A decision needed to be made about what to do next, but it should be made carefully and with consideration for his mother's memory and wishes. Royal Guard searches Camilla's wardrobe, unearths the late Queen's iconic coronation gown queen. Camilla requested a private moment with the gown. She wanted to see it for herself, to understand what had meant so much to her late mother-in-law. Lord Hampton arranged for her to visit the dressing room alone, with just one conservator present to ensure the garment's safety. Camilla stood before the dress for a long time, studying every detail. She saw the hours of work that had gone into each embroidered flower, the careful placement of every pearl and crystal. As she looked at the gown, Camilla began to understand Queen Elizabeth better. This dress represented more than just a ceremonial outfit. It symbolized a young woman's commitment to a lifetime of service. Elizabeth had been only 27 years old when she wore this gown, taking on responsibilities that would define the rest of her life. The dress had witnessed her promises to her people, promises she had kept faithfully for 70 years. Camilla thought about her own coronation, which had taken place just months earlier. She remembered the weight of the crown, the solemnity of the ceremony, and the overwhelming sense of duty. She could imagine how Elizabeth must have felt, decades younger and facing an even longer journey ahead. The gown suddenly felt less like a museum piece and more like a bridge connecting two women who had both taken on the role of queen, though in different times and circumstances. The conservator explained the technical aspects of the gown's construction. She pointed out how the dress had been designed to be both beautiful and practical for the long ceremony. The fabric was heavy enough to drape magnificently, but not so heavy that a young woman couldn't move in it. The embroidery was placed strategically to catch light from different angles, ensuring the dress would photograph well and look stunning to the congregation at Westminster Abbey. A family meeting was convened at Clarence House. King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William, and Princess Anne gathered to discuss what should be done with the gown. Each had their own perspective on the situation. Prince William felt strongly that the dress should be returned to the official collection where it belonged. Princess Anne understood her mother's desire to keep it close, but agreed that proper protocol should be followed. The discussion was respectful but filled with emotion. King Charles shared more entries from his mother's journals. He read aloud passages where she described taking out the gown on significant anniversaries. She had written about how touching the dress helped her remember her youth, her hopes, and her determination to serve. The journals revealed that during particularly challenging periods of her reign, she would spend time alone with the gown, finding strength in the memory of her coronation day. Princess Anne spoke about her mother's pragmatic nature. Despite being queen, Elizabeth had been a practical woman who valued personal connections to important moments in her life. Anne remembered her mother keeping other significant items from her past in private spaces. The coronation gown was simply the most valuable and historically important of these keepsakes. It made perfect sense that their mother would want it nearby. The family eventually reached a consensus. The gown would be returned to the royal collection, where it would be properly preserved for future generations. However, they would first create a detailed photographic and video record of the dress in its current state. They would also share the story of why Elizabeth had kept it in her private quarters. This would add a human dimension to the historical artifact, showing that even a monarch cherished personal memories. Plans were made for a special private viewing before the gown was moved. Close family members would have the opportunity to see it and to remember Queen Elizabeth through this tangible connection to her coronation. The viewing would take place in the same room where the gown had been discovered, creating a full circle moment. Afterwards, conservation experts would carefully transport the dress to its permanent home in the royal collection. Media speculation about the discovery had begun to circulate. Journalists sensed that something unusual was happening at the palace. Several news outlets published stories about increased security activity and mysterious meetings among senior royals. The palace press office prepared a statement, carefully crafted to tell the truth while respecting Queen Elizabeth's privacy and maintaining the dignity of the situation. The statement was released on a quiet Friday afternoon. It explained that Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown had been found in a private location at Buckingham Palace, where the late Queen had kept it for personal reasons. The statement emphasized that this was not a case of theft or impropriety, but rather a private arrangement made by Queen Elizabeth herself. The gown would now be returned to the royal collection where the public would eventually have opportunities to view it. Public reaction was mixed. Some people were touched by the story, seeing it as evidence of Queen Elizabeth's humanity and her private emotional life. Others questioned why such an important historical artifact had been kept in private quarters, rather than in the official collection. Royal commentators debated the implications endlessly on television and in newspapers. Most agreed, however, that the discovery provided a fascinating glimpse into the late Queen's personal world. Conservation experts began preparing for the gown's transfer. They created a specialized transport container that would protect the dress from any environmental changes during the move. The route from Buckingham Palace to Windsor Castle was carefully planned. Security arrangements were made to ensure the gown's safety. Every precaution was taken to prevent any damage to this priceless piece of history. Before the move, the Royal Collection Trust announced plans for a special exhibition. The coronation gown would be the centerpiece of a display examining Queen Elizabeth's reign through significant garments she had worn. The exhibition would include not just the coronation dress, but also other important outfits from key moments in her 70-year reign. It would tell the story of a monarch through the clothes she chose to wear at defining moments. James Mitchell, the guard who had made the initial discovery, was quietly commended for his professionalism and discretion. He had handled an extremely sensitive situation with perfect judgment. His careful documentation and immediate reporting had prevented any complications. The palace security procedures had worked exactly as they should, even in this most unusual circumstance. James felt proud to have played a role in this historic discovery, though he knew most people would never learn his name. Royal Guard searches Camilla's wardrobe, unearths the late Queen's iconic coronation gown. The day of the private family viewing arrived. The gown had been carefully displayed on a custom-made mannequin in the throne room at Buckingham Palace. Professional lighting had been arranged to showcase the dress's intricate details. Family members arrived throughout the morning, each taking their time to examine the magnificent garment. Queen Camilla stood beside King Charles, and together they looked at the dress that had started Elizabeth's remarkable journey as queen. Prince William brought his children to see the gown. He wanted them to understand their great-grandmother's history and the weight of royal responsibility. Princess Charlotte was particularly fascinated by the embroidered flowers, asking questions about each one. Prince George stood quietly, perhaps beginning to understand that one day he too would wear a crown and take similar vows. Prince Louis simply marveled at how sparkly the dress was, his innocent comment bringing smiles to the adults present. Princess Anne shared stories about her mother that the younger generation had never heard. She talked about Elizabeth as a young queen, finding her way in a role nobody could truly prepare for. Anne described how her mother had balanced being a monarch with being a wife and mother, always putting duty first, but never forgetting her family. The coronation gown represented the beginning of that complex balancing act that had defined Elizabeth's entire life. A team of photographers documented the family viewing. These images would be preserved in the royal archives, showing future generations how the family had honored Queen Elizabeth's memory through this special moment. The photographs captured genuine emotion, family members touching the gown's fabric gently, pointing out details to children, and standing in quiet reflection. These were private moments that revealed the human side of a family that lived their lives in the public eye. Margaret Davies, the senior staff member who had explained the hidden compartment's history, was invited to attend the viewing. She had served Queen Elizabeth for so many years and had been trusted with the secret of the gown's location. King Charles personally thanked her for her loyalty and discretion. Margaret was moved to tears, grateful to see the dress one more time and to know that her service to the late Queen had been recognized and appreciated. The next morning, the gown began its journey to Windsor Castle. The specialized transport team arrived at dawn, when London streets were relatively quiet. They carefully placed the dress in its climate-controlled container. A small motorcade accompanied the vehicle, though it traveled without fanfare or police escort. The trip was planned to be as unremarkable as possible from the outside, while inside the vehicle, extraordinary care was being taken to protect an irreplaceable treasure. At Windsor Castle, The conservation team had prepared a special space in the Royal Collection storage facility. The room had perfect climate control, with temperature and humidity monitored constantly. The gown would be stored flat in a specially designed drawer lined with acid-free tissue paper. Regular inspections would ensure its preservation for centuries to come. Future monarchs and the public would be able to see this magnificent dress and remember the young woman who wore it on that historic day in 1953, the Royal Collection. Trust began planning the exhibition in earnest. Curators studied photographs and newsreels from Queen Elizabeth's coronation day. They gathered other garments from significant moments in her reign. Each item would tell part of the story of a woman who had dedicated her life to her country. The coronation gown would be the star of the exhibition, but it would be contextualized within the broader narrative of Elizabeth's extraordinary life. Designers worked on creating an exhibition space that would do justice to the gown's significance. They planned to use mirrors and lighting to allow visitors to see the dress from multiple angles. Information panels would explain the symbolism of each embroidered emblem. Video screens would show footage from the coronation ceremony, letting people see the gown in motion on that momentous day. The exhibition would be both educational and deeply moving. Queen Camilla continued her regular duties, but the discovery of the gown had affected her deeply. She found herself thinking often about Queen Elizabeth and the burden of royal responsibility. Camilla had known Elizabeth for many years before becoming part of the royal family, but this incident had given her new insights into the late Queen's private thoughts and feelings. It made her appreciate even more the woman who had served Britain with such dedication. In her own private moments, Camilla sometimes thought about the hidden compartment in her dressing room. It remained empty now, but it stood as a reminder of Queen Elizabeth's presence in these rooms. Camilla decided to keep the compartment as it was. Perhaps one day she would find her own meaningful items to store there. The space connected her to the history of the room and to the remarkable woman who had lived there before her. The press continued to follow the story with interest. Royal biographers incorporated the discovery into their books about Queen Elizabeth. The finding of the gown in a private location added a new chapter to her story, revealing a sentimental side that many had suspected, but few had seen documented. The story humanized the late Queen, showing that beneath the crown and formal duties was a woman who treasured memories of the most important day of her public life. Historians debated what the discovery meant for understanding Queen Elizabeth's reign. Some argued it showed her need for personal space and private comforts, despite her public role. Others saw it as evidence of her deep commitment to her coronation vows, wanting to keep that memory close throughout her life. Most agreed that the story added depth to the historical record and would be studied for generations to come. The exhibition was scheduled to open the following spring, timed to coincide with the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's coronation. Advance tickets sold out within hours of being released. People from around the world wanted to see the famous gown and learn its extraordinary story. The Royal Collection Trust prepared for unprecedented numbers of visitors, knowing that this exhibition would be one of the most popular they had ever mounted. Meanwhile, conservators worked carefully to ensure the gown was ready for public display. They examined every inch of the fabric, making minor repairs where necessary. The dress was cleaned using specialized techniques that would remove decades of accumulated dust without damaging the delicate materials. The pearls and crystals were individually checked and secured. Every preparation was made to ensure the gown would survive being viewed by thousands of visitors, while remaining preserved for future generations. Royal Guard searches. Camilla's wardrobe unearths the late Queen's iconic coronation gown. The spring morning dawned bright and clear over Windsor Castle. Today was the opening day of the exhibition featuring Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown. The grounds had been prepared for weeks with additional security measures and visitor facilities installed. Media from around the world gathered outside the castle gates, their cameras ready to capture the first visitors entering to see this remarkable display of royal history. King Charles and Queen Camilla arrived early for a private tour before the public opening. They walked through the exhibition slowly, pausing at each display. The coronation gown stood in the center of the main gallery, illuminated perfectly to showcase its intricate embroidery. Beside it, information panels told the story of how the dress had been commissioned, created, and worn. A separate panel explained the recent discovery in Buckingham Palace and Queen Elizabeth's private reasons for keeping it close. Camilla found herself moved by the exhibition's presentation. The curators had done an excellent job of balancing respect for history with honest storytelling. They had not hidden the fact that the gown had been in an unconventional location. Instead, they used this detail to reveal Queen Elizabeth's humanity and her personal connection to her coronation day. Visitors would leave understanding not just the historical importance of the dress, but also the private woman who had worn it. The king paused in front of a video screen showing footage from the 1953 coronation. He watched his mother, young and beautiful in the magnificent gown, processing through Westminster Abbey. He remembered being a small child at that ceremony, too young to fully understand what was happening but aware that something momentous was taking place. Seeing the footage now, knowing what he knew about his mother keeping the dress close, gave him a new appreciation for the weight she had carried throughout her life. Princess Anne joined them for the tour. She stood beside her brother, and together they watched the coronation footage. Anne pointed out details she remembered from stories their mother had told. She explained how nervous Elizabeth had been that day, worried about tripping on the long train or making some error in the complex ceremony. Yet in the film, their mother appeared composed and regal, every inch a queen. It was a performance born of duty and determination, qualities that had defined her entire reign. When the doors opened to the public, the response was overwhelming. Visitors entered reverently, many visibly emotional at the sight of the famous gown. People of all ages came, from those who remembered watching the coronation on television to young children learning about history. Each person seemed to connect with the dress in their own way. Some saw it as a symbol of British continuity and tradition. Others saw it as a reminder of a remarkable woman who had dedicated her life to service. An elderly woman named Dorothy Stevens waited in line for 3 hours to see the exhibition. She had been 16 years old in 1953, and she remembered the excitement surrounding the coronation. Her family had purchased their first television specifically to watch the ceremony. Dorothy stood before the gown with tears streaming down her face, remembering that day and all the years of Queen Elizabeth's reign that had followed. The discovery of the dress in the Queen's private quarters made it feel more personal somehow, more real. School groups toured the exhibition throughout the following weeks. Teachers used the gown as a starting point for discussions about history, duty, and leadership. Students wrote essays about what the dress represented and what they had learned from Queen Elizabeth's life. The exhibition became an educational resource, helping a new generation understand the significance of the monarchy and the personal sacrifices made by those who wear the crown. Fashion experts and historians came from universities around the world to study the gown. Academic papers were written about its construction techniques, its symbolic elements, and its place in fashion history. The dress was recognized not just as a royal artifact but as a masterpiece of mid-century design and craftsmanship. The embroiderers who had created the original work in 1953 received posthumous recognition for their extraordinary skill. James Mitchell visited the exhibition on his day off. He stood quietly in front of the gown he had discovered, thinking about that morning when he had opened the hidden compartment. He felt proud to have played a role in bringing this treasure back into public view. His discovery had led to a deeper understanding of Queen Elizabeth's private life and had given millions of people the opportunity to see and appreciate this magnificent dress. It was, he reflected, the most significant moment of his career. The hidden compartment at Buckingham Palace remained a quiet secret, known only to senior palace staff. Queen Camilla had decided to keep its existence private, respecting the intimate nature of Queen Elizabeth's personal space. Occasionally, Camilla would open the panel and look into the empty compartment, remembering the remarkable woman who had built it and the precious item she had kept there. It was a private connection to history that meant more to her than any public monument ever could. As months passed, the story of the gown's discovery became woven into the broader narrative of Queen Elizabeth's life. Biographers included it in their books. Documentary filmmakers featured it in their programs. The tale of a queen who kept her coronation dress close for comfort and inspiration resonated with people everywhere. It showed that even someone who lived in palaces and wore crowns was still human, with memories and emotions and needs for personal connection to important moments. The exhibition was extended multiple times due to popular demand. What had been planned as a 3-month display continued for over a year. The Royal Collection Trust used revenue from ticket sales to fund additional conservation work on other historic royal garments. Queen Elizabeth's coronation gown had not only told its own story, but it also helped preserve other pieces of royal history for future generations. King Charles reflected on how the discovery had affected him and his family. What had begun as a potential scandal had transformed into a touching revelation about his mother's private life. The gown's journey from Windsor Castle to Buckingham Palace and back again had revealed Queen Elizabeth's humanity. It showed that beneath the crown and the ceremonial robes was a woman who treasured memories, who found comfort in connections to her past, and who had carried the weight of duty with grace for 7 decades. The story had a lasting impact on how people viewed the monarchy. It demonstrated that royal life, for all its privilege and grandeur, also required enormous personal sacrifice. Queen Elizabeth had given her entire adult life to service, but she had found ways to maintain connections to moments that mattered most to her. The coronation gown represented not just a ceremony but a promise she had kept faithfully until her final days. Years would pass, and the gown would continue to be displayed periodically for new generations to admire. Each time it was shown, the story of its discovery would be told alongside descriptions of the coronation ceremony itself. The tale of Officer James Mitchell finding the dress in a hidden compartment would become part of Windsor Castle lore, shared by tour guides and written about in guidebooks. The coronation gown of Queen Elizabeth II remained one of the most beloved and significant items in the royal collection. It represented a moment of national celebration, a young woman's commitment to duty, and the personal story of a monarch who kept close the memories that sustained her through decades of service. The discovery in Queen Camilla's wardrobe had not diminished the gown's importance. Instead, it had added another layer to its rich history, making it more meaningful and more human. The dress had begun as a symbol of monarchy, but through its hidden years at Buckingham Palace and its eventual return to public view, it had become something more. It had become a reminder that even queens are human, with hearts that hold dear the moments that define their lives.